This is Ishaan Bath, and this is my Guerrilla Filmmaking video essay in which I'll be discussing the 4 films that I made: What is Home, Imperfection, Perfection, Cyberbullying Nightmare, and Rewind's Final Message, A Love Letter. There was a reading on the module by Mike Figgis. 2 quotes of his from this reading I felt were particularly inspiring to me because I felt that they summed up what the whole module is about: time and resource management. One of the problems in filmmaking, though, is that there is a certain snobbery about pieces of equipment. To me, what I felt that meant was just because you don't have a Sony FS7 to make your film doesn't mean that you are prohibited by your equipment. I used an old camera that I've had since high school that I hadn't used for quite a while. This being the camera in question, a DSC W180 Sony Cybershock camera, which I used for my first film. Something else that Figgis says is that I urge young filmmakers to change their attitudes about cameras. Don't have an attitude towards the equipment based on your preconception of its value. For the period of its working life, the camera will be the filmmaker's most crucial connection between the idea, the intention, and the result. That's the connection you're interested in. Again, linking back to the first point about the snobbery about that some people have towards certain pieces of equipment. This is ultimately saying that despite technical differences and advancements between equipment, they will all pretty much serve the same purpose. You should just rely on whatever equipment you have. The first film I completed, What is Home, had a very different concept behind it from what I ended up making, which was to go around photographing various houses and various environments that wildlife lives in. And I was going to show how fundamentally different those 2 environments are, but at the same time showing that those are still homes to various different species. I was going to expand upon that by showing images of the universe, so show our solar system and the planets in there. But I decided to discard that after discussing it with William because he found it a bit vague. He said it ultimately wasn't personal to you. He said there's nothing wrong with the idea, it's just that it's not personal to you and you should perhaps try and focus more on what does home mean to you personally rather than the kind of abstract idea of home, which I agreed with. I decided to choose a topic that I really love and feel passionate about, which is reading. I decided to just get as many books as I could at home and just photograph myself reading them and displaying them. While I was editing the film, I decided to use a transition that mimicked a page turning in order to further convey to the audience the importance of reading in my life. That transition was to help tie into, I much prefer the feeling of a book in my hands rather than just reading off of a screen. Moving on to the problems that I had while making What is Home, time management was a big factor. I had to split time between this project and the production project module for specifically for the documentary project, which ended up taking up a lot of my time. More of a minor issue compared to the time management issue was that I obviously couldn't photograph all of my images that I needed to use, so I got my mum to help me photograph them. However, she was unwilling to show off all of my rooms. The photographs you see in the film are mostly just limited to, when I appear in the film, limited to me just sitting on the bed with a book. When I do explicitly mention that I feel most at home when I'm in my room reading. Another issue I had was lighting, because the main light in my room is a light which has 3 bulbs that kind of hang down like this, and 2 out of the 3 bulbs have burst, so the lighting isn't great, just so it's got this sort of greenish tinge to it. With the second film, Imperfection, Perfection, I decided to choose a metaphor that I thought was imperfect, which is the glass is half full, half empty debate. I decided just to, again, kind of get my own personal views across to the audience. So the idea of using Transformers action figures to help convey the difference between the glass being half full, half empty actually came to me while I was filming. It came from an illustration that I saw. Something to note about while I was using Transformers figures is that I only had an Optimus Prime action figure, and then when I realised I needed to have a Megatron, I didn't have a Megatron to hand, but fortunately the Optimus Prime figure has these flip-up communicators on his wrist which have images of different Transformers characters, so one of them ended up being Megatron. I started planning this film at the same time as What is Home, but again, because of my commitments to the documentary project. I didn't actually start editing until the 3rd of March. The idea is that you film with a camera phone, which I did use. I chose to film it vertically, sort of the horizontal. When I was editing the film and rewatching it, I did feel that it did suffer because I chose to film it vertically. And the reason is because I find it much easier to hold the phone vertically. Another problem, which is entirely a failing on my part, was that I could have filmed more footage. Because of how quickly I needed to get this film done, I ended up filming not as much footage as I would have liked to or needed to. Certain shots repeat themselves. With film 3, A Cyberbullying Nightmare, I wanted to choose a human rights issue that was very important for the time that we live in. I felt that with this film I would try and convey the thoughts and feelings that might be circulating through someone's head who's going through cyberbullying, but also try and weave some facts about cyberbullying in there. Cyberbullying just came up. That's an interesting topic to use since we live in a highly technological age. The mandate for this film was to create a film that had no synchronization between image and sound. Sound was always going to be a major part of this. One of the first things that I thought about was I should use industrial music. Depending on what tracks I use, it could really tie into the idea of this nightmare with a lot of metal clanging and otherworldly sounds created through computers. I mostly used various Nine Inch Nails instrumentals, while also tying that together with Henry Jackman's score from Captain America the Winter Soldier, specifically the Winter Soldier's theme. I felt that the combination of industrial music tracks would help create a cacophonous and sinister and perhaps even violent sounding soundtrack, and I thought that the use of industrial music would link to the idea that technology is being abused by people to abuse other people. Other sounds that I used were from clips of interviews that I'd researched. One interview that I found quite effective was of a father in Canada being interviewed about how cyberbullying led to his daughter committing suicide. I decided not to make that the focus of the video because I felt that I would be exploiting a tragedy in some way. I took a few sound bites and intertwined them with several other sound bites from other interviews and news reports about cyberbullying. So at the beginning of the film, the audience is getting various facts from different voices, which then play over each other, so that then starts to play around with the audience's head, so they're getting fragments of information but not the whole thing. And coming back to the tragedy I've spoken about, towards the end of the film, there's a quote from the father where he says, "Not one of them has ever been held responsible," and I kept on repeating that towards the end because I found that quite shocking that the people were never prosecuted. I decided just to use that one soundbite and then play that in isolation from the rest of the clip from that original interview. So again, the audience is only getting a fragment of that information. I tried to make that quote seem more generic by isolating it. I wanted to have a chaotic editing style interspersed with the industrial music to help convey the anger and torment that a cyberbullying victim might be going through. I didn't really have any problems with this film aside from editing, so it was just a case of getting images in the right sequence and getting music to play in the right places, which obviously took some time. Towards the end of the film, when you hear the repeated line of the father, that's intercut with two images of a very childlike drawing of a split screen image. So you've got two people at computers, one who is the cyberbully and the other one who is the victim, and that's intercut with a highly detailed kind of manga-esque image of a cyberbully typing away at a computer, and then that's got this very nightmarish look to it. So the cyberbully looks very demonic. And the reason why I chose to intercut those two images together was to create a contrast between the similar images, but also those two images were saying the same thing. They had the same message. Moving on to my fourth and final film, Rewind's final message, A Love Letter, I had chosen to do a dramatic reading of a scene from a Transformers comic book, which featured the first official gay Transformers couple. The idea is that one of them, Rewind, has died, and in his final moments he managed to make this film for his partner, Chrome Dome. The reason why I had chosen this scene was because this message didn't just need to apply apply to the Transformers franchise and those two characters. That kind of a message could be done with any medium. So it could have been done in a film, could have been done in a video game, could have been done in a novel. But I felt that this message could have also been conveyed, not even just between a gay couple, it could have been conveyed through a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman, and so on. This message had a universal quality to it that was just being depicted through the Transformers. The way I made the film was to take the actual comic panels from the issue and just apply voiceovers and sound effects. I acquired scans from the comic via the internet. That big double page had several individual panels representing different characters. So I then basically had to take each image and then isolate each panel and remove that from the larger page. Problems that arose while creating this film were voiceovers, which there are a lot of them. I believe there were 36 voiceovers in total, and I ended up doing most of them. My main concern with the voiceovers was not to make them sound too similar to one another. I do feel that some of them still sound quite similar to each other, especially some of the voices at the start of the message, very upper class, British, educated accents. Ultimately, I decided just to persevere with it because I wasn't sure how many voiceovers I could get done in time. There are some other actors featured in the film doing voiceovers. Some of the voiceovers that had been submitted to me for whatever reason weren't compatible with my computer, so I had to discard some of those recordings and re-record those lines, such as there's an image of a Decepticon character behind like these metal bars and he's saying "let me out." The actor who had originally recorded that line did a much better performance than what I ended up doing when I re-recorded that line, but because the audio file he sent to me wasn't compatible, that was just something I had to deal with. So this film had the most rigorous editing process of any of the 4 films that I've worked on for this module. I didn't want this to drag on because when I was reading the comic, I felt that this message, it's a brief final goodbye, and I didn't want it to drag on because I felt that it would bore the audience. And when I had tried it that way in the editing process to have it quite long, it didn't have the same punch to it. I felt that the way to help space out the film but also keep it brief was to include the cuts of the TV static, because if you go back to the comic, these spaces between panels, so these white lines that you can see, is where I interpreted there being some TV static. So the idea is that Rewind has compiled all this footage of various people that he's met during his life, then taken bits and pieces of footage that he's recorded, and then taken dialogue and then weaved it together to create one message. Ultimately, I am very pleased with the result of this video because it's a scene that's very important to me, and I felt that, but also that the message in that scene is very important and universal. So what I've learned on this module is how to be effective in your time management and also to be effective in your resource management. Coming back to the figures quote, the equipment that I use, they are ultimately tools that serve the same purpose. While I could have used something like Premiere Pro to edit these films, iMovie was what was readily available to me. I'm on whole happy with the results that I've achieved with these 4 films, and I'm happy with the feedback that I've achieved with these films. It has shown me that I don't need to have highly sophisticated equipment or software just to make a film. I can use whatever I've got. I can use these films as a stepping stones for better projects to come.